What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Tour Talks. We have another exciting interview today. I felt like it'd be great to get Alex Hoskins. If you have not seen, in the competitive bowling social media world, there has been a bit of a rivalry, a big debate. Do layouts really matter, or how much do they matter? This is between J.R. Raymond from BowlerX and Mikey Pinnell from the Bowling Science Facebook group. And so who better to ask than Alex Hoskins? Not only does he have one of the highest levels of technical understanding of ball motion and bowling balls, being pretty high up in the R&D department of Storm, but he also is a very accomplished competitor. He made the Masters telecast in 2017, 2018. He has many accolades and titles, so he knows what it takes to win at a high level, and he also knows all the technical stuff about bowling balls. So will he be Team JR or will he be Team Mikey? Let's find out. Let's get into our interview with Alex Hoskins. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Tour Talks. We have Mr. Alex Hoskins here. If you have been living under a rock in bowling and you haven't seen him in a Storm technical video or marketing video, he is kind of the technical guru, I would say. You've kind of positioned yourself as the technical guru kind of underneath Hank. And Hank has kind of, I would assume, mentored you. So I'm really excited to get into the layout talk. Currently, I mean, we scheduled this a while back, but in that time, there's been this chatter, around if layouts matter or not. So I'm excited to get into that. But first, I want to just kind of talk about Storm. There's some big changes there. We just had an interview with Hank, and he talked about it as well. So before we get into Tyler and those changes, what was your relationship like with Bill? Yeah, let's start with there.
Yeah, so I really honestly didn't have probably as personal of a relationship with Bill as some of the other guys here that have been here a lot longer.
Yeah.
My office is also, if you've ever been here, it's actually downstairs, more in the production area as well. So I'm very far from where he was. So I didn't really, see him on a day-to-day basis too much. But back in April, when Dave ended up retiring and Bill took over the role of president and CEO, he started sitting in on a lot more of the meetings. And one of the meetings that I actually orchestrate is the R&D meeting. So he would come to that more often. And I got to kind of be a little bit more personable with him. But Bill was just such a great guy. He wanted to make you, he always made you want to be better, work harder, do better overall, without really having to ask you to do that. So
interesting. Yeah, that was going to be my other question, is if you're working your way up Storm, obviously you're kind of in a bit of a leadership position and maybe want even a larger leadership position. As a leader, what do you think were the little bit you got to know him, what do you think were like those aspects about Bill that allowed him to have the success that he had, and maybe made him different than other people you've seen run companies or try and form companies?
Yeah, I think some of the words that come to mind when I think of Bill is just determination, grit, motivation, passion. This guy would not take no for an answer. You talk to any of the guys that have been around here for a long time, 20 plus years, guys like Corbett, like Hank, that have been around him for a long time. The guy he's a motivator, and he makes you want to, like I said, be better. He had huge aspirations, started from basically nothing, just a small little distributor here, got an idea that, hey, we want to try and make bowling balls, took out a loan against his house, nothing.
It's crazy.
Nothing there, and amazing, into a multi-million-dollar company. I mean, talk about pursuing your dreams and inspiration. I grew up in, small town Pocatello, Idaho, and that's only an hour 30 north of here. And I kind of heard that story, and I was just hooked on Storm after that. It was always what I wanted to do, and really tried to pursue, knowing people here and learning more of the technical side and just anything bowling related, so I could try and get my foot in the door here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's not too many people. I don't even think of one that I've ever seen work at Storm, even if they left Storm for another company. I mean, they don't ever say anything bad about Storm and Bill. So it's always interesting to get an insight. I never got to really meet, Bill, and so it's interesting to get that insight. Now, so for those of you that don't know, Tyler Jensen's kind of taking over the realm as president, right? And Barbara is still CEO?
Yep.
Yeah. And so how well do you know Tyler, and how do you think he might what ways might he impact Storm? What ways might Storm be a little different in 5 years?
Yeah, so when I first started at Storm in 2016, Tyler was still an RSM for Storm. So I did know who he was. He was obviously in kind of the more southern region of the United States, so he wasn't around a lot. But when he did, the RSMs would come up for kind of a yearly review type thing. And I actually drilled a bunch of bowling balls for him one of the times while he was
Oh,
here.
nice.
I'll never forget, he sent me a Christmas card that year that said best bowling ball driller ever. And it was just kind of funny. But as I transitioned to the RSM role, I saw him out on the road a little bit. So I have a pretty good relationship with Tyler. And I do think he is a great fit for the role. I do like that somebody a little bit on the younger side that's not afraid to, go out there and make some changes and do some things that are, maybe not what somebody that's been in the position for a long time would be very open to doing. And I think that's really important in continuing to move forward. You don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over and expect kind of a different result.
Yeah, exactly. And that's always one of the interesting things as a business owner myself is, to become so dominant in your industry already is very unicorn-like. What is the next level that's even more difficult is if your company can go on beyond the original founder and visionary, when Jobs passed away with Apple, it was really kind of curious to see how the company was going to do. And, kind of same thing when Gates stepped away from Microsoft. So now in terms of technical and you there at Storm, do you love where you're at now? Do you have other aspirations within the company? Because where you're at now is actually kind of high for how old you are, right?
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely honestly really happy where I'm at. And I like looking at it in the kind of the grand scheme of things with the company. I feel like at least where I'm at right now is where I'm providing the most value to the company. Like, obviously you'd always like to, go higher, do whatever, you have your career aspirations, but I really feel like where I'm at now is providing the most value to the company. And I think that's the most important. It makes me more important to everybody here. So.
And you feel that way mainly just because you have so much passion and knowledge around the technical side, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's just kind of the way my mind works. Always liked, math and science in school, and bowling is just an enormous problem that is very complicated to solve. And it's all on a case-by-case basis. It's very difficult to, dial something in for the masses when you only have, a set number of products from here that we're trying to develop for countless styles.
Yeah, totally. And that gets kind of down the rabbit hole that I'm excited to get into. I mean, it's always interesting to know what's going on with Storm and how you're thinking about that, but really the technical side. Can you share a little bit for the viewers that don't know, what do you typically do on a day-to-day basis from a technical R&D side, and how might that differ from what they might think Hank does or any of the other people that work with you in the R&D department?
Yeah, so I'm in the R&D department that's headed up by Hank, and then I have quite a number of people down below me. I was the R&D manager when I first transitioned into R&D, and that was more like the lab actually producing like the new bowling balls, testing new balls and stuff like that. I still do a lot of that stuff, but I delegate a lot of it out now as well. The other side of R&D that I think a lot of people don't really think about is the production R&D. We're making thousands and thousands of balls every day. We need to make sure that it's as efficient as possible, that if there's this new type of machine or new method to maybe mix or do some other things, I'm involved heavily in trying to kind of create better processes through the production side of things as well. Everyone else is kind of some of the other big departments, marketing, you have product development, sales, engineering. I probably work the closest with product development, engineering, and production overall. So
okay, so you got it. So then to clarify, do you spend a lot more time on product design than necessarily like production?
It's honestly more almost a 50-50 split on actual kind of design of stuff and production R&D. More so when we're talking about the like development of balls and stuff, it's obviously the CAD and the cores and all those things, where when it comes to like the colors or the fragrances or kind of the names and stuff, that's more on the product development or the marketing side. So I'm not really too involved in that.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So let's dive into the technical side. This is really so viewers, for those of you that haven't seen, there's been a little bit of in this very small niche pocket of pro shop guys and technical guys and people who take bowling very seriously. There's been a bit of this debate that it depends what you read and where. Social media is always a little messy. But on one side, you have J.R. Raymond, who's basically saying, I think at one point I thought he had said layouts don't matter. I think he's kind of positioned us now to a place of layouts don't really matter that much. And then on the other side, you have Mikey Pinnell, Mo Pinnell's son, and the Bowling Science Group, who say, layouts matter a lot. Where do you stand on that, Alex? Do you think layouts are overemphasized? Do you think they're really important? Is there a better way that we should think about it than that?
Yeah, so it's the hard thing about bowling is there's so much gray area, right? There's almost never a black and white for sure answer one way or the other. So I can kind of side with both of these guys, honestly.
Okay.
On JR's side of things, I think the layouts don't matter is kind of a clickbait thing. And then when you actually listen to him talking about, it doesn't matter in some situations. I would agree for, 120 average player that needs to focus more on other areas of their game. A half an inch difference in pin to PAP distance or something like that isn't going to raise their average, 20 pins. It's going to be a lot more beneficial for them to see a coach or something and get better physically.
Yeah.
But on the other side of things, with Mikey's side, I definitely agree that, again, as a pro shop operator or anybody involved in bowling, why would you not try to get as close as you can? The layout is a variable that we do have control over. So that's something that, to me, I would want to always be putting emphasis on to try and get it at least matched up as close to however my player happens to be and what they happen to be bowling on.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of on both sides there.
Sure.
A little bit. And if you've ever watched any video from me, you'll see I almost put everything at the end of what I say has a disclaimer of, this is not an absolute. It's just a rule of thumb. There can be some changes because everybody's a little different and the environments are all different everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know if you would agree with this, but for me, the more I've interacted in my life with people who really, really work in science, the more you hear it depends, and normally if I hear someone make very strong claims, like much more absolute claims, that's normally for me a little bit more like, okay, this guy probably doesn't really work in the science of it,
Yeah, that's actually, it's funny. I actually have that in my notes. Anytime somebody's like, oh, this is for sure the right answer, it's like huge red flag kind of way.
Yeah. So let's dive into that a little bit about try to help consumers understand maybe a little bit better from an actual, R&D guy who's working in the science there of designing bowling balls, testing a lot of bowling balls layouts. I'm going to give you some scenarios and you tell me, do layouts matter more or less in certain scenarios? So for example, a house shot versus a sport pattern. Do you feel like a house shot hides differences in layouts a little bit more than a sport pattern? Or is there a different way they should think about it in terms of if they're bowling on a certain pattern?
Yeah, I mean, pattern will make a difference, but I would say more so friction is going to make the difference where that friction is. The more friction there is, obviously, the more difference you're going to see in a layout. If there's no friction, every ball is going to just do the same thing. It's going to go straight and not change direction at all. So house shots you think are generally higher ratio. So there is defined friction to the right. So if you're, getting it out to that friction, it could matter quite a bit. I'm probably not going to drill something extremely strong, a really short pin buffer, a really strong pin for somebody that's really up the back of it if they're on a lot of friction, because it's just going to want to get the ball going way too forward and it's going to be difficult to achieve the right entry angle through the pins.
Okay. Sounds good. So that leads into a question then. You kind of based it a lot more on friction, as it sounds like as friction goes up, layout matters more. So would it be fair to say then that as someone becomes more rev dominant, that layouts matter more as opposed to more speed dominant because they create more friction? Is that fair to say or not?
I think you could go down that a little bit. And also the higher that your rev rate gets, the more the procession of the ball actually happens, right? So as you get to, the difference between a 6-inch pin to PAP distance and a 4-inch pin to PAP distance might be 3 or 4 inches of total flare, which is going to really change the dynamic of how much fresh cover stock is being exposed to the lane and creating that friction. So basically, yes, to answer that question.
Okay. What's up, guys? Just a quick message to say that if you like bowling videos like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button. As always, we appreciate the support so much. We're growing quickly and we can't thank you enough. Now let's get back to the interview. Okay, so it definitely sounds like friction is playing an underlying factor for the most part in terms of how much layouts matter. When customers or pro shops are thinking about layouts, should we think about it in terms of total hook, or is that more cover stock finish like I think JR leans on a lot, or are we thinking about it more in terms of ball motion and phases of ball motion for optimal pin carry to kind of create area, or what is the role that layouts play, or how should pro shop guys and customers think about the role that layouts play?
Yeah, the layout is really kind of the final fine tuning device or variable of the ball, right? The ball has its natural design intent, and then you can kind of tweak it one way or the other based on the layout to more match it up better to that certain style of player. What I'm a big fan of is using kind of limited layouts. I don't really like seeing much more than 3. I usually tell people 2 or 3 layouts, and I really try to get those layouts as far apart as I possibly can, because it kind of goes back to that debate, right? A 1/2 inch in pin to PAP distance isn't really going to create a massive difference for certain styles of players. So I want to make sure that, when I'm going out there and I'm bowling personally, that I have some options that transition really fast. The layouts from skid to hook to roll, they're stronger pins, shorter buffers, in case I really need that ball to dig into create a lot of fresh cover stock touching the lane through that procession. And then I want kind of a benchmark ball and something a little bit weaker. And then I just kind of adjust the cores and the covers on each of those. So I'll have kind of a stronger cover with a weaker layout, maybe even a stronger cover with a stronger layout, and then vice versa on the other side. I think the biggest thing is just creating the most variety that you can, because there's so many different situations that you can find yourself in now, that it's really important that you match up what you're bowling on to your style of play. Because we know you hear the saying all the time, you can't outbowl bad ball reaction. You can throw the ball as good as you want physically, but if it's not giving the lane what it wants to see, it's going to be really hard to knock all 10 pins down.
Yeah. And now for people that I think there's still a pretty large group that's just like cover stock, cover stock, cover stock. If you want the ball to hook more, hit it with more surface. If you want it to hook less, add polish. What if people went with that tactic? What roadblocks would they run into with not trying to use the lever of layouts at all?
Yeah, I think that layouts have kind of got put on the back burner a little bit with surface, because surface does create just such an easier big difference for your eye to see. But one thing that I always say that I think is really important is just because a ball is going straight on the lane doesn't mean that it's not doing something, right? So through the front part of the lane, yeah, all balls look the same basically through the first 30 feet of the lane, because they haven't encountered enough friction to do any kind of meaningful change of direction. But it is really important to utilize those different layouts to be able to kind of create different windows front to back. Surface, no matter what, is kind of, if you have the same layout and you just change surface on the balls, it's going to be a little bit different in how the ball hooks and goes through the pins compared to if I use maybe a stronger layout with less surface. If there's a lot of friction in the front part of the lane, I can still get the ball through the front of the lane because the surface is the dictating factor there. But
Right.
Now the layout has already kind of processed a little bit, so I can get something to be a little bit smoother off the end of the pattern without sacrificing just digging into it and surface and making me get way too far left and then having the ball not want a corner.
Right. And so for viewers, when you say procession, that's really the idea of this weight block kind of, it's really your axis moving, but it's really this kind of, for the average consumer, maybe this weight block kind of moving or progressing over time, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a complicated thing to explain, but yeah, basically the weight block, it actually doesn't stand up. It stays on the same RG band. So the same, right when you let go of the ball, whatever direction it's staying, that's where it is. And it actually goes in a circle on that same RG band the entire time it goes down the lane. Now, the unique thing about that is that it exposes the fresh new cover stock to the lane, which, if you go back 20 or 40, 50 years ago when there was no differential in the balls, you throw the ball down the lane, you just have that one ring of oil on there, and the oil just kind of piles in the same spot. It's very hard to create friction, and it creates a lot of carry down. So we can adjust how far apart those are and create different amounts of friction through that. And that's exactly what Procession is. And that's controlled by the layout primarily and the
Right.
amount of differential that's on the inside piece, that weight block.
Right. So I'm going to try to maybe squeeze this all down, and you can, again, with people in science, they hate it when you try to, consolidate something down to something shorter.
Yeah.
But so the layout really impacts at what point the ball is at in procession. And you could, maybe another way of saying this, actually, let me rephrase this. So if I was to try to boil down what you're saying, and I want you to tell me if this is wrong, because I know sometimes it can be frustrating for people that work in science to try to boil it down to something even shorter. You have the phases of ball motion, which are skid, hook, and roll. And those play a huge role in how much area you can create in your pin carry. And when you're mentioning procession is really the ball working through those phases of ball motion. And while surface can kind of impact that skid phase, the layout, with different layouts, like you said, you're putting the ball in a different RG band, different differentials, can basically make it where even though two balls look like they're going straight, like you were saying, in that front part of the lane, when they do start to get to the friction, they're at actually different points of procession or different points in those phases of ball motion. And so you can get different shapes, even though they look like they were doing the same thing in the front part of the lane. Is that about right?
That's a pretty good summary. Yeah. One can kind of burn off more. You could say procession is burning off some of the energy, even though that's not exactly what's happening. But yeah, it's jump starting without actually going through that phase of ball motion. It's just a little lever that we can kind of use to manipulate how quickly or how slowly it sees that lane front to back. And you kind of mentioned that there, and I think this is important to say too. And that's a big thing that separates some of the good amateur players versus the professionals is the lane is 17 and a half times longer than it is wide. So there's a lot of real estate, a lot of stuff happening front to back. And it's really important with both surface and layouts to be able to control that middle part of the lane to get that skid, hook, and roll in the proper part of the lane to create good ball motion.
Yeah, absolutely. I forgot to mention that in the intro, but Alex has a ton of success as a competitor. He's made the USBC Masters telecast twice, back-to-back years in 2017, 2018. So not only does he know it from a technical side in designing the product, but he also knows how to apply it on the lanes. And so to your point, Alex, and I see this in the shop as well, the very, very good players do see the lane front to back, and we hear that thrown around a lot. And now relating that to this hot topic of layouts, really you're saying that, you can use that surface to kind of get the ball to pick up or start wherever you want. But whether that ball is really kind of soft and lazy when it sees it or is stronger, that's really the layout that determines that. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. You can have, like I said, the best example is a polished ball. You can make a polished ball go through the front of the lane extremely easy, right? But I can use the layout to make a polished ball come off the end of the pattern extremely smooth or extremely sideways. And that you can't exactly do that with the opposite. If I change the layout and I have a ton of surface on it, no matter what I do, it's going to hook as soon as it touches the lane, basically.
Right.
It's definitely a give and take on both.
Yeah. And now I know JR has mentioned at times about just changing axis rotation to create more shape off the spot. Would you say that that's kind of is what layout does, but makes it a little easier, so you don't necessarily, have to be able to change your axis rotation 5 degrees on a dime? Is layouts essentially allowing you to become a more versatile bowler without necessarily having to change your hand position, or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think there's definitely some truth to, we're trying to. The goal is for us to be able to stay in our comfort zone as long as we can, right? We're very good at one thing. So anything that we can do to the ball or to the layout or anything to be able to kind of stay in our comfort zone longer is definitely going to help us bowl a little bit better overall. So, I would agree with that a little bit because, yes, if you do put something a little bit weaker on it, that's the whole idea of somebody maybe that doesn't have a lot of axis rotation to begin with, right? We're probably not going to get them into something super strong that burns off axis rotation really quickly, because then they're going to have to completely change their game, get around it a little bit more. They might be a little bit less consistent. Anything we can do to kind of tighten up that, I always say control as many variables as we can.
Right.
So many things when you really start thinking about it that are out of our control. Anything that we can do to try and make the game more in control for ourselves is definitely going to be a benefit. And I think layouts are a big part of that.
Yeah, for sure. Especially for the average person who may not be as talented as as JR or those high level guys that are putting in a lot of time and those kinds of things. So that gets into the whole debate and a whole nother topic almost, which is living in the information age, right? Getting information about layouts and bowling and what to do in bowling in Facebook groups, in YouTube videos. As a very highly knowledgeable technical person, do you feel like we are definitely still in a better place today than we have been in the past with getting information, or is it almost where there's too much, or people can get the wrong information? What's your thoughts on the current state of being able to inform yourself as a consumer?
Without a doubt, information is way more readily available, right?
Yeah.
I'm by no means old by any means, but when I was a younger teenager and I was really getting into this stuff, there wasn't that many places on the internet that you could just go and find information about, bowling balls. I would stay up and watch all these old YouTube videos and stuff when I was younger, and
me too.
didn't really know if it was good information or not. And I think that's kind of the double-edged sword that we fight today. Is it's much easier to get information, but honestly, there's unfortunately a lot of kind of bad information out there, and we kind of talked about it earlier. There's that black and white answer information that just doesn't really apply to bowling. There's so many variables and so many different things that can happen. It's more trying to understand what the general trend is for a certain style and how it might apply to you for what you happen to be bowling on. But there's definitely a little bit of a gray area there.
Right, for sure. And as the companies, you guys have your AI core, and there's all of these advancements. You had a great presentation that I was at Bowl Expo that started talking about actually static weights might have a little bit more impact than what we think. Can you talk about a little bit about that? I'm not sure how much our viewers would be interested in that, but just in case, static weights, for those of you that are watching, finger weight, thumb weight, side weight, those kinds of things, top weight, bottom weight. And for a long time, for the most part, they weren't considered by pro shops to be too relevant.
Yep.
Alex again showed his research, which is really what I always like to see, is when USBC or PBA or any of these entities make a claim, for them to at least be somewhat transparent with the research. Alex, tell us a little bit about what you found there with that.
Yeah, so that's like a really great example, I think, of showing how like information can change over time, right? Like we live in a whole different world now as far as the rules are concerned, right? So we used to only have, an ounce in either direction and then 3 ounce top to bottom. Now we're in 3 ounces every direction. So, everyone kind of looks at me crazy when I'm like, hey, these statics kind of matter now when you actually can move it, a little bit further, closer to your axis, or you don't have to worry about staying within that 1 ounce rule. And now you also don't have a balance hole. So a balance hole would change the reaction of the ball. You could change the diff plus or minus 10. So it was a lot easier to see big changes there, where it just overpowered the 1 ounce that you could move the CG one way or the other. But now that we have 3 ounces in every direction, for certain styles of player, it does make a big difference. And if you ever want to start a really good debate on the internet, just, start mentioning static weights, because it's another one that affects everybody slightly different. And that's where, again, if I see somebody that says, oh, this does not matter, or this does matter, like they're basing it on something they saw, either whether it's themselves or somebody else that they watched bowl. It's not really like you just said. We did a ton of research on this. We did a lot of different styles and kind of tried some different things that people may not have been able to try in the past, right? We're in a different world now. These balls are now legal without having 2 3/4 ounces aside, where before you'd have to put the balance hole in, it would be completely different. So basically what we found is, for players that have lower ball speeds or less rev rate, even more less axis rotation, those statics are going to matter a little bit more. And that should make sense, because if anybody's ever seen, a 6-pound ball go down the lane with 3.5 ounces of top weight, the little kid that's throwing it is usually pretty sad, because it almost never stays on the lane.
Yeah.
There's actually 2 types of procession going on there. The first one that we were talking about is torque-free procession, and that just happens through rotation of the bowling ball with the shape. But then we have another side of it called torque-induced procession. And basically all that means is there's a heavy spot on there, and there's a weird phenomenon when something's spinning and there's a heavy spot close to the axis, it'll actually make the entire thing rotate. You may have seen like the bicycle wheel get spun on the little tire, or on the rope there, and it actually spins in a circle. So that's just one of those physics things that, I don't think a lot of people in the bowling industry really look at too much. And it's very difficult to see on the lane because it may only be, gaining a few degrees of axis rotation, which you might not think is very important. But when we're talking about the difference between maybe 5 degrees and 6 degrees of entry angle, striking 80% of the time compared to 90% of the time, you catch one double in between, catching a flat 10 or a messenger, your score adds up really fast. That's the coolest thing about bowling is the score can just move in either direction from one shot. You can lose 10% of your entire score on one shot, depending on what happens. So I'm always a big fan of, and I always have been since I started here, challenging kind of the norm. I'm not just going to take, you're telling me that happened. Let me actually kind of test it out with a lot of different people.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and you seem really confident. You must be right,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that leads into the other question. So first, to kind of recap that a little bit for viewers, axis rotation is, if your ball's rolling end over end or straight towards the pins, it's 0 degrees. And then as your ball is rolling more on its side, that's more axis rotation. And I think, Alex, what you're saying, if I remember your presentation, is that essentially static weights can impact how quickly a person loses axis rotation.
That's a very good, simple way to explain.
Yeah. So for viewers, if you need to have a certain amount of axis rotation, so that way you create entry angle, like Alex was saying. And so static weights can impact if by the time you get to the end of the pattern, end of the lane, you might have, like he was saying, a few more degrees, or I don't know what the variance is there, but you can have some more degrees of axis rotation to help with entry angle. So that leads into my next question, Alex, which is, when you're thinking about something like static weights, someone's going to say like, okay, well, that's not really going to make a relevant difference. And so that leads me to a question that you might end up hating the way I'm asking it. But what is the percentage change in ball motion that you think takes a 190 game that you can hit the pocket a lot, maybe not carry very much, right, to a game where you, like you said, you get a little bit more entry angle? What do you think is the realistic percentage change in ball motion? And then should we think about it as a percentage of movement on the lane, or is it a percentage change within the procession that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, that's such a hard question just because there's so many different things that are happening as the ball goes down the lane, right? Man, I'm honestly not sure like exactly how to answer it. Like the thing I think that I always relate to score, at least, is we did a huge pin carry study where we actually did different offsets and entry angles with a ramp that was actually suction cupped to the lane. And I think, honestly, that was like one of the craziest testing processes I've been a part of here at Storm, because it just opened my eyes on how such small changes to how that ball hits the pins make an enormous difference in how the ball goes through the pins and how often that you're striking. So, I mean, it may sound kind of crazy to say, like a 5%, change would make an enormous difference, but in all reality, it really does. And when we're pushing the envelope of technology and really trying to kind of, get these small incremental things, the biggest thing I think of is the AI core, right? We did another drop test on that with going through the pin carry study through both different cores, and we found, in 800 shots, 800's not millions of shots by any means, but it definitely started, the two lines kind of started to diverge a little bit. The AI core definitely was creating a little bit more pin carry in that sample size that we did. So, and that's just something as small as keeping the exact same weight block in there and just changing kind of how that core material reverberates when it hits the pin.
Yeah.
So that's enormously small change.
Yeah, and I remember years ago they started talking about coefficient of restitution in videos, and that was when you realize, man, there's so much more that goes into how the pins move around and how things carry. And then that's when I realized, like, okay, you know what, I don't really know as much as I thought I knew, and that's why I keep showing up to your presentations and as many clinics as I can to kind of understand that. But so it sounds to me like really your philosophy on that side of it, layouts and all those kinds of things, is that the smallest amount of percentage, even a 5 to 10% change in any of these elements, can really maybe create a little bit more area or a little bit better pin carry. So why not try to get everything you can out of every decision you're making? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, that's perfect. And those small, I think it's atomic habits, maybe small incremental, 1% a day or anything like that, it compounds. So things we're in control of, why would we not take advantage of being in control of it and try and utilize it to the best of our ability for the person that's actually bowling?
Right, exactly. Now, on the competitor side, since you obviously have a very technical thinking, analytical brain as an R&D guy, but you've also had a lot of success as a competitor, which is, as they say, a little bit more right-brained in the flow state. And for those of you that are into that kind of stuff, how should consumers think about, trying to get out all of the juice, like we're saying, try to make sure everything is correct and where it needs to be on the technical side, but not necessarily overthink it and understand that the execution side, is there any rule, any framework for them to not kind of overthink it in that way?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have kind of checks and balances on yourself of what your tendencies, right? For me personally, I do have a really in-depth knowledge of the bowling balls, and I feel like I'm kind of unique because I'm one of those ones that does know quite a bit about the industry and about bowling balls, and I actually can kind of bowl kind of good sometimes. So I find that the people that don't quite know as much, generally it doesn't hurt them nearly as much because they're more simple, right? And that's what I've really tried to do in the past few years. When I first started at Storm, I actually used to go into Hank's office every Friday, and like 30 minutes we'd just talk technical stuff, and that's where that mentorship kind of came from. He taught me a lot of what I know, and he said, be careful with this because a lot of bowlers, as they learn more, they bowl a little bit worse because they're constantly thinking of these things and kind of letting it get in the way of their actual execution. And I did go through kind of a period of that a little bit, and I'm more in the mindset that the more simple and the more logical that you can kind of keep it, the better overall your results are going to be. You kind of understand what are the big things that are happening right now. Is this a physical issue? Is this something on the lane that I can change? And then just keep things really simple really makes the game a lot easier, because at the surface, the game looks really easy. You're just rolling a ball down the lane and hitting all the pins. But as you kind of start stripping it back layer by layer, I mean, it gets immensely complicated, and you can fall down the rabbit hole of, oh man, should I have hit this with 2000 first? Or should this layout have been a little bit more this way? Like, that's where I say diversification really kind of helps you when making those decisions, and just knowing your kind of general tendencies will help the most.
You're saying diversification in the arsenal?
Yeah, for sure. Just so that you can, the worst thing I think you can do is have everything kind of close together. And then if you're not bowling good, you're making these changes, and it just kind of feels like nothing really definite is telling you is it the ball, or is it me, or is it where I'm playing on the lane? Like, a lot of times when I'm struggling, I'll actually go the exact opposite direction of what I think or what my thought process is that I'm going. I'll just sacrifice a frame and say, I need to see if what I'm seeing is right or not.
Do you have an example of that to try to make it a little more relatable?
I think one of the best ones actually was at the Utah Open here. It's one of the biggest Northwest Tour events that we have. There's 700-ish entries. It's a good event. And the pattern is always extremely difficult. And so you're always kind of using balls with surface, really rolly, smoother stuff. And I just could not, I didn't perceive that my ball was hooking as soon as it touched the lane. I was like, man, they are so tight down lane. Like, I need to ball up. I need to get this ball to actually see the lane so I can create some shape. And I was like, none of these balls are doing that. So I actually grabbed a high road pearl, so super high RG pearlized ball, just took a big step left and just flung it out to the right, tons more shape down lane. And I was like, okay, so I need to go the other direction a little bit more and try and smooth it out or further with cleaner covers and kind of stronger layouts to be able to get that ball to come off the end of the pattern a little bit smoother, because you don't really want 45 feet of skid and then jackknife. So either way, it gave me kind of an eye-opening of, I probably wouldn't have thought to go that direction. I would have thought stronger, but it was just not the right move.
Right. So maybe if, again, to try to boil it down for viewers, because my goal is always to kind of, give them something. It sounds like, maybe get as technical as you want, in preparation for bowling, putting that arsenal together, those kinds of things. And then when you're thinking about layouts, it sounds like obviously pick the right ball first. You're saying in terms of diversifying, kind of pick the right ball first. That's probably most important. And then, trying to get as much as you can out of those layouts and making sure that you have a good variety or diversified arsenal, right?
Absolutely.
And then, once you have that and you're bowling, you're not really thinking, you're not trying to view your ball and like how, it has 2 more degrees of axis rotation or anything like that. You're just seeing the general ball motion, as a bowler, what good ball motion, bad ball motion looks like. And then you're just following your gut through that experience, really. You're not thinking super technical. Is that right?
Yeah, that's really a great way to kind of boil it down. There are some days that I'm kind of more on the technical side and some days that you're not. It just kind of depends what the situation is. And I think you're always learning, right? You learn more about yourself on what may help and what may hurt. But I think you summed it up perfectly there.
Okay. I've always thought that the technical knowledge is a lot more necessary when you go to coach. But sometimes, because I've interacted with really good players who see their own ball motion and can make ball switches incredibly well that don't know technical very well. Would you say it's kind of fair to say for those that are kind of maybe passionate about technical or think that they need a high level of technical knowledge for their game, would you agree that really where that extra layer of technical understanding comes in is mainly when you're helping other people, because you have to kind of understand a game that's not your own? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, as you gain more, that's where I kind of say there's sort of a divergence, right? The more you know, kind of the less you are a bowler, it seems like. The more you gear towards, like you just said, coaching, or even better on the pro shop side of things.
Yeah, exactly.
You're able to identify, hey, this variable, these guys would work well together. How can I do that for my customer?
Right.
Or as you're the only one that's watched every single one of your bowling balls go down the lane. So you have a pretty good idea of your tendencies and how you are. So,
yeah,
it is good to have that technical knowledge. But again, I'll say as we get to, there's not a lot of bowlers that didn't know anything about bowling balls that bowl really good. There are some, don't get me wrong, but not the majority.
Sure.
Not a lot of bowlers that know everything about bowling balls that bowl very good. So a good balance in there, I think, of having some knowledge of it and actually being able to execute it.
Yeah, that leads into another good question. What do you think is the minimum, like if you were to say what that general basis is in the middle of the knowledge that they should know, what would you say that is if you had to boil it down in terms of difference between bowling balls or layouts or what?
Yeah, I kind of think of it as, I see these videos on YouTube that are like explaining different topics and different levels of education. There's like a toddler, elementary school, high school, college, and graduate. I think right in the middle, kind of that high school level, which to me is like, you need to know the differences between cover stocks, the differences in RG and differential values. You don't need to necessarily know what they mean, like the physics definition of it or anything, but I need to know that, 248 behaves like this with a set amount of friction on the lane. 257 is this in relation to that with that same amount of friction, because those are small little building blocks kind of that you're able to make your good decisions off of, right? The lane's changing all the time. You're going to have to go through your progression and everything. So you really need to know about, again, bowling balls, core dynamics, layouts really important, surface is very important. That's all, again, things we're in control of. And then you get to the other side, which is the environment. You need to know a little bit more about oil patterns, lane surfaces, where do I need to play, what, you can read an oil pattern sheet, get a good idea of kind of where to start, but ultimately it's going to be, what am I seeing, and knowing how to take what you're seeing and apply it to making good decisions on where to go from there, basically. It's such a tight game that it's...
Yeah, that's okay. That gives a general idea, because something I talk about a lot and something else I want to ask you about is this law of diminishing returns, which is kind of this idea where, if I only have $1, you give me another $1, there's, that dollar helps me a lot, right? But if I have $1 million, you give me $1, there's a law there of diminishing returns and so on the technical front, the other thing I wanted to ask you was this in terms of, so for the bowlers out there that do know that, they kind of understand RGs, diffs, cover stock technology, oil patterns, those kinds of things. is there a law of diminishing returns for them if they are kind of wanting to get more into even deeper into the technical there, where it's like, okay, if I drill it here, the differential goes up this much, or you know what I mean, like kind of that next layer beyond that. What is that point where you should probably only really go there if you want to be a coach or a pro shop operator?
Yeah, I think there probably is a point there at some point. The thing that I think gets difficult is, again, these are small incremental changes that, you know, whether you perceive that it's making a difference or not, it may be making a difference and you just can't see it very well on the lane. You know, we're battling it out for a half an inch more total hook, and what even is total hook, right? You know, is that lateral? Is that front to back? There's just, it's so difficult to you know, to say at what point does there kind of become no more return on your knowledge, you know?
Yes, as a competitor.
I think it's more how you apply that knowledge. I would never say that you're not going to get benefit from learning more. And I've tried to really do that in this position here, is feel like I'm constantly learning. And they say the more you know about something, the less you feel like you know. And I'm definitely in that boat, because I feel like every year I look back on my memories from testing from a year before and I'm like, man, this is insane. Like, you know, I thought I knew a lot then and now I know more now. It's just, you've always got to constantly be learning. But if you're learning and you're letting that kind of dominate what you're doing while you're bowling, as opposed to just letting that natural tendency kind of take over, and that's where I say you want to be very kind of logical, very simple. The game is already complicated enough. Don't make it more complicated.
Sure. Yeah. So it's not so much, it's just making sure that the technical aspect doesn't dominate when you're bowling.
Yeah.
So so on the other law of diminishing returns idea I wanted to ask you was on your side. So like, what percentage of your day are you actually trying to work on new innovative things? And at what point do the molding manufacturers say, like, man, we have a whole R&D department and they're working on this particular thing and it costs a lot of money and we get 1 or 2% more out of a bowling ball? This is a question I wanted to ask earlier and I kind of skipped over it. So it's a little off topic what we're talking about now, but how do you guys balance the cost that goes into, you know, the AI core obviously created some type of improvement, but at what point does the cost not justify the impact?
Yeah, I think it's no secret, right, that everything in the economy is more expensive now than it ever has been.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That goes for us too on the manufacturing. So now we can kind of talk about the production side of things. Production costs have gone up a ton as well. So it is very difficult, and there is, I don't think we're at a point or even are remotely close to a point personally where we wouldn't justify any kind of cost for some kind of performance improvement. But the one thing you do have to think about is a lot of things have been tried, right? So when you're talking about something, what is the next biggest thing or the next great thing that might come out of bowling? It's going to take a huge process change. It may be something that nobody's ever done before, that you're going to have to invest in a lot of really big machines or capital for something that's going to work completely different than what you're currently doing. So I think that's the other side of things to think about, is, you know, what the costs are here in terms of what that gain would be. Right. But as far as, you know, smaller advancements, we're always finding little things, little additives we can put in the cover stock, or different weight block designs and things that translate to a little bit better, more consistent ball motion for players, which it's not too big of a deal in terms of cost.
Right. Well, that wraps up most of the questions I had, man. Do you have anything exciting that that's going on for you personally, or there within Storm, that you can tease or let us know about? Or
no, that's the hardest part about my job in Storm. Yeah, you can't. There's always exciting things going on here, but you'll find out in some time. But personally, I'm running a marathon in a month and a half, so that's
nice.
That's going to be kind of crazy. I've been in training for 2 months now, 2.5 months. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully I'm still alive afterwards.
Yeah. For those of you that don't follow Alex on Instagram or Facebook or any of those kinds of things, definitely do that. He posts sometimes the amount of steps and things like that he's gotten in a day, and they are pretty wild. If you want to continue to feel really good about the amount of steps you get in a day, do not follow him. Let's put it that way.
Yep.
So Alex, as always, man, you and Hank, everyone at Storm, I cannot thank you guys enough. You guys are always so generous with your time and your knowledge, and we really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us, man.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks, Greg.
We hope you found this video useful. As always, if you like videos like this, make sure you hit subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.